All right, team. We're gonna. This video is about French onion soup. This is probably the soup that is gonna take the most time this week. Um, I have my ingredients laid out right here. It's a little bit different than what the recipe calls for, but not much. I'm just not putting the sachet together. Okay. I have my 5 pounds of onions right here, and they're sliced about a 1/4 inch thick. You see that right there? And I slice them with the veins so they don't make me cry, and or at least not as much, and they soften much easier. Okay, and then I have about 2 ounces of butter. I got 3 cloves of garlic that is being sliced. I have my bay leaf and some peppercorns, and then I have my sherry. I also have some water that is not on the recipe, and I have my mixed stock, which is half chicken stock, half beef stock. Okay, I've been preheating my pan, and I also have some salt and some pepper. Okay, um, for this recipe, this first part of caramelizing the onions is what takes the longest. Okay, if you feel like your pot is not big enough, the onions should reduce to about a third of what you start with. So, not to worry that you're gonna run out of space. What we're gonna do is we're going to start cooking them, and then we'll cover them, and then we'll add a little bit of water, and that will make the onions soften much quicker, and they will lower in size, and then we can continue on adding more onions. Okay. First thing I'm going to do here is put the butter in my pan. Okay, and that's gonna melt there. You don't want the pan too high. I have it on that's medium low right there, and we're going to add some onions, and I'm going to add maybe a third of my onions in here. If you have a pot that you can't fit a third of the onions, whatever you can fit is okay. All right, and I don't want to add all the onions at the same time because I want my pan to come up to heat fairly quickly. Now we have our onions going. We can hear them sizzle. I'm going to try to coat them with the butter, but we don't want to have any brown in the early stages of cooking these onions. It should take, the whole process should take about 40 minutes of just cooking the onions, and then finishing the soup will be the easy part. Okay, so the idea here is to slowly caramelize these onions nice and even and get them nice and soft, or as soft as possible. Okay, now that I hear a sizzle, it's where I'm going to show you a little bit a trick that is a little bit different than what your recipe calls for. I know your recipe calls for 20 to 25 minutes of caramelizing the onions, but I believe that they don't get nearly as sweet as they need to. Okay, so I'm going to add as many onions as I can fit in this pot, which in this case is all of them. Okay, and that's about 4 quarts of onions. So if you have a 2.5 quart container, you're probably gonna have to do this in 2 stages. But then I have butter in there. I am also going to add a little bit of oil. Okay, and then about a 1/4 cup of water in here. Okay, I'm going to turn it up, and as soon as I see some steam, I will cover my onions. The idea is that we're going to wilt them, and then we'll turn it down, uncover them, and get rid of all that water, and then they will caramelize in a more even manner. Okay, as you're waiting for the onions to or for the water to steam, you can continue coating the onions with the fat. Okay, so just kind of move them around as much as you can. If your pot is really, really full of onions, then just um, take it easy on them. That way they're not jumping all over the place. Alright, I'm starting to see some steam. So at this point, I'll cover my onions. And I'm going to let them cook for about 4 minutes, and I'll come back and check. Alright team, it's been about 5 minutes, and I don't know if you can tell, but there's a lot of steam here. My onions are translucent, and they're already going down to maybe 3/4 of the amount that I had here already. And now I'm going to let my water evaporate and my fat start taking care of that caramelization. If you had this on medium high or on high, now is the time to turn it down to medium or medium low. Okay? And we'll keep it on that heat until the onions are starting to gain some color and they're kind of giving you a little bit of a hard time. If you're not moving in, they'll become they'll start sticking to the pan. So at the beginning you'll have a little bit more leeway, so maybe every 6 minutes or so come and check them and move them around. And then after that, the closer you get to them being evenly brown, the more you have to move them. Okay, we don't want them to start looking dark fairly quickly. We want them that with time they're evenly browning. So dark brown, really, really dark brown, we don't want. We don't want any of that caramelization that you, or any of the color that you will see when you sear or saute an onion. We want them to get there very slowly so we can develop the sugars and have a nice and sweet onion, almost like a marmalade. Okay, this is gonna take about 30-35 minutes, so I will show you guys around when we get there. But leave them uncovered and keep them on medium low heat. Okay team, it's been about 8 minutes. You could really smell the bay. The onions are really soft and sticky, almost breaking apart. This is a hearty broth soup, and I personally like this soup a little bit heartier than just following the recipe and just making the stock just thick with the onions. Right now you should have just onions and a little bit of fat in the bottom of the pan. You might not notice that it's fat, but it's there. Okay, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spread the onions nice and even, and I went and grabbed a little bit of flour. And this flour, I'm only gonna sprinkle a little tiny bit off the top of it, and it should mix with the fat that we have in here and make kind of like a small version of a roux. And that's just gonna give the soup a little bit more texture. It's not necessarily gonna make it thick, but it's just gonna make the onions feel a little bit thicker. You can see I only just put a little bit on the top, and I'm gonna mix this well and stir it and cook it with the onions for maybe a good 3 minutes. And you should see that the onions will become a little bit even more sticky than what they were before, almost pasty, like not necessarily in a bad way, but almost like you're coating them with flour. You can see that. Make sure that the bottom of your pan still looks good like that. And at this point, we're ready to continue with this soup. Notice in the variations in your recipe says that if you're gonna add sherry to this, to not add it on this next step, but to add it towards the end. But we're fairly close to the end, so we're gonna add it after we put this stock in there, okay? So right now, our next goal will be to take our stock and pour enough stock in here to just cover the onions, which should be about between 3/4 to the whole thing in order to cover the onions. And now we're going to turn it to high and bring this to a boil. Traditionally, you would serve this in a French onion soup bowl where you can put a crostini on the top and some cheese and melt it. And I'll leave that up to you. I think the goal here, the technique here that I want you to focus on is caramelizing those onions and developing that flavor without burning the bottom of the pot, which requires a bit of heat management. And also, I must say, after 20 minutes or so, it was almost constant, the amount of stirring that happens. I could have taken this to a bit darker if I wanted to, but I didn't. And if you are going to use calvados, some people use beer. Put the beer or the calvados in here with the onions before the stock goes in there, and that way you can give that calvados or beer or brandy enough time for the alcohol to evaporate and not have that raw alcohol flavor. Okay. At this point, I'm just about to come to a simmer. I'm gonna grab my sherry here and pour it all in, and I'm just gonna let it cook for another 5 to 10 minutes. Alright guys, at this point this soup is pretty much there, so all we need is a little bit of seasoning. So I'm gonna grab some salt, pour some salt in here, and I'm gonna get some pepper. I'm gonna mix this in pretty well, and then taste it, and we'll go from there. As you taste it and as you look at it, the liquid shouldn't be thin. It should have some kind of a little bit of a thickness or some consistency in there. Tiny bit more salt. And I am pretty sure this soup is now done. Yes. Now, when you serve this soup, make sure that there's always a good amount of onions when you're putting it in a bowl. I'm going to show you here. So as you can see in this bowl, there's lots of onion in the soup. It's not mostly broth. It's just almost like your Emilia Romana, where there's a lot of solids in there. And there's French onion soup for you. If you like to melt some cheese on it, just go ahead and put a crostini in here, and then or a piece of toast, some nice cheese. Put it in your broiler, let it get nice and bubbly, and it'll be good to go. French onion soup. Vamos, bicho, puñeta.